Welcome to You Are From God, where we open the Bible and learn to see the image of God in ourselves and the people around us. I'm Scott Taylor.
And I'm Tyler Hall. Thanks for joining us today. Today we want to go to an Old Testament story that is a short book in the Bible, and sometimes it doesn't give enough credit for its place in the record of God's Spirit's writings that we have to learn from, and that is the book of Ruth. When we come to the book of Ruth, it stands out as so odd for lots of reasons in the biblical narrative, Scott, but for the big piece of it, and I think a lot of people already know this about Ruth if you've done any reading of your Bible, this kind of flips the script on its head. It starts like you would expect maybe a story of the Bible to start, introducing a man with his wife and his sons, and then all of the male characters die. So for a patriarchal society back in this old time, it's very odd that we have a story that is immediately focused on the women. And this is the story of really Naomi. Even though the book's named after Ruth, it starts with Naomi. It's told from her perspective. It ends with her perspective. And we see how her traveling through this period of grief and just utter devastation actually ends with her being restored. And there's this fascinating change that goes on, at least from her perspective, with her name. And that's kind of what we want to talk about today. But it happens because of the way the people around her are acting, most of all Ruth. And so today we're just going to focus on the first chapter and talking about those things. But just to kind of start the conversation, Scott, I mean, I hadn't thought about this before, but I was reading something the other day by a commentator that basically said Naomi is the woman version of Job. She has everything taken from her. Maybe not in one day like Job does, but she is the suffering servant of God who wants to know why. Why? And you see that struggle, maybe not to the same degree of 40 chapters of Job, but you get her pictured here in just this devastated state of all the things that happened to her just in this first chapter.
I mean, you think about just, she had to leave her home. You know, Job at least was still at his home. But to your point, you're dealing with somebody who has lost everything. But she has this amazing relationship with these two women here in the first chapter. And we obviously talk about Ruth, but Orpah also, that she loved them. She calls them her daughters. She wanted the best for them. And so they were also weeping and crying of losing their husbands. And so you just imagine as this book starts, the sadness that you see, to your point, that just right off the bat gets going. And so what she's thinking is she wants to do what's best for her two daughters-in-law, which is what's best for them really is to stay in that land, not to go with her back to Judah. And I think all of us can understand why that would be the good thing to do at the time. And so you're going to have a different reaction of the two. But I think it's amazing in verse 14, as an example, they loved her. They loved Naomi for everything that she did. Orpah kissed her, and then it talks about Ruth clung to her, and that's really where the story will take off with Ruth. But Tyler, it's important to understand these people had great loss, but they also had great love for one another. And the reaction of the two doesn't mean that one was wrong, one was right. It's just the idea that they reacted the way that they thought that they should.
Right, and that's the powerful thing, because Orpah, you just kind of read and go on, okay, the book's not named Orpah, it's named Ruth, let's talk about Ruth. But Orpah's doing the sensible thing. You know, it's what Naomi's recommending she does. And she actually uses some very sound reasoning. In verse 11, but Naomi replied, "Return home, my daughters. Why do you want to go with me? Am I able to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. Go on, for I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me to have a husband tonight and to bear sons, would you be willing to wait for them to grow up? Would you restrain yourselves from remarrying? No, my daughters, my life is much too bitter for you to share, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." So this offers amazing insight into what Naomi's going through. You talk about just, why am I going through all this? So another piece of this that we don't necessarily see in the forefront, but it's absolutely coloring everything that's going on. Naomi, her daughters-in-law, her sons, they had all lived in the land of Moab for 10 years, it says in verse 4. You know what didn't happen in 10 years? Grandchildren. And so something at least is amiss with that from the standpoint of Mahlon and Chilion and Orpah and Ruth. But that means that Naomi is a widow in the truest sense, because not only does her husband die, she has no male children or grandchildren now to carry on the family name. And so that's a big piece of the driving factor of just the stark circumstances that these women find themselves in. And so for Orpah, she's right. It only makes sense. It only makes sense. So why in the world does Ruth cling? That's the amazing piece of it. And obviously, as we read down into what she says next in verse 16 and following, we see what Ruth is thinking.
Yeah, and it just, again, it shows the love that these two had for one another. And Tyler, there's some amazing verses here of what Ruth says that we'll read. Verse 15, Naomi says, "Behold, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not plead with me to leave you or to turn back from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you sleep, I will sleep. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and worse, if anything but death separates us from you." When she saw that she was determined to go with her, she stopped speaking to her about it. This doesn't take away the pain and the agony, which we're going to get into in just a minute, but she understood Ruth was going to be with her during this time. Verse 16 and 17, these are words that we would say in a marriage ceremony to one another. So you think about this daughter-in-law saying this to her mother-in-law, and understanding that kind of a relationship is the relationship that we're striving to have with a spouse, that we need to be. And the amazing thing, Tyler, she meant it. Mm-hmm. This is absolutely what she meant. She was willing to leave her land to go and to be with Naomi in a place that she didn't know. All she knew was Naomi. And she certainly obviously knew some of the family and those types of things. Maybe she had obviously had talked about the God, and those type of conversations had to have happened. But for her to say, your people will be my people, I'm not going to continue to be with the people where I am. Where you die, I'm going to die. You don't have to bring me back to Moab. All the different things that play into what she says, and for her to actually mean it. What an amazing example that is, but also a tremendous sacrifice on the part of Ruth. However, there's a lot of mourning that's still going on when it comes to Naomi.
Right, and that's why I think this is such a powerful moment, because Naomi is going to continue grieving and weeping once they get back to Bethlehem. But here in these verses, 16 and 17, this is Ruth showing a transformed heart that's focused on the Lord. It's powerful, I think, of how Naomi instructs her in verse 15. Your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Well, these two women have been influenced by Israelites, of Yahweh-worshiping men, and obviously Naomi. And so now you have, despite Naomi's urging her on and saying, just go back to your other gods, just go back. And I almost hear Peter here from, I think it's John 6 and verse 66, where else am I going to go? You've shown me that this is the kind of life to live, because it's about God. Your God is going to be my God. The type of people that you come from, that's where I want to be. I don't want to go back into what we would say is the world, right, back into Moab. Would I have better luck finding husbands or starting a family again? Yeah. To be clear, Ruth would still struggle, and Orpah's still going to struggle, even going back, being widows themselves now. But the point is, she's even in worse straits by going with Naomi. And so the power of clinging to God, of devoting, of sacrificing for Naomi here is powerful. Naomi's still going to struggle with that. It's an amazing thing that Ruth does, and it's certainly a comfort in different ways as we see the story progress that we won't get into today, that Ruth brings to Naomi. But to your point, Scott, they get there. In verse 19, the two of them travel until they come to Bethlehem. When they entered Bethlehem, the whole town was excited about their arrival, and the local women exclaimed, "Can this be Naomi?" Now, it's important we haven't brought this up yet, but Naomi means pleasant. And so when she hears them talking, you can almost imagine they're walking into town and the women are whispering, this isn't the woman who left, a dozen or so years ago. And so she tells them in verse 20, don't call me pleasant. Don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara, which means bitter. She answered, for the Almighty has made me very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has opposed me and the Almighty has afflicted me? So Naomi came back from the territory of Moab with her daughter-in-law Ruth the Moabitess. They arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. This is bonus point, Scott, but I find it fascinating that Ruth and Naomi, or at least Naomi with her husband and her sons, leave during a famine, and then they come back during the barley harvest. The whole reason they're coming back is because it says the Lord's visited his people. There's crops again. There's food now in the land of Bethlehem. But from Naomi's perspective, I went away full. Yeah, there was a famine. My stomach's empty, but I went away full. I had my husband. I had my sons. And now I'm coming back empty. And again, you almost hear the words of Job here. It's the Lord's hand against me. I'm bitter. I think this is so important for us, Scott, to understand that when we have this relationship with God, we have got to be honest with him. We have got to say these things. He already knows what we're feeling. So whether we're going to save face in front of somebody else or trying to fool ourselves into everything's fine, this woman is telling it like it is, and she's being honest with her God. I feel like God's against me. His hand's gone out against me. So don't call me pleasant. I'm not pleasant right now. I'm bitter. I'm so bitter. Now it's interesting because this name's not going to come up. Nobody's going to call her Mara, and the text is not going to call her Mara because pleasantness does come back. It doesn't mean that the hurt and the pain and the struggle societally and otherwise is going to go away, but it does mean that she's going to have these amazing opportunities for her daughter-in-law, this one who chose to come back with her. She is going to sacrifice so much. She's going to go out and work in the heat of the day all day just to put food on the table. God's going to do some amazing things in there with other characters in the story. But for us to understand the bitterness piece of this, that Naomi is so bitter, and she's got to be wondering, where is God? And so I think for a lot of us, bitterness comes from this understanding of whether it's in another person directly dealing with us or not dealing with us, or just the circumstances of our life. Where is God? Why is his hand against me, it feels like? But I think with Ruth and what she says, she is showing, and she will continue to show, God hasn't gone anywhere. Even in the midst of terrible circumstances, God's with her. And the fact of the matter is, Scott, that it's the same for us. We can say, I'm bitter, I'm so caught up in just the anguish and the agony of what I'm going through. But God is putting people around us in our lives. God is giving us reminders that he still cares, he's still there for us, he's aware of what's going on, and he has not left us, even when it feels like his hand is against us. It's amazing that here Naomi keeps calling him the Almighty, and that's one of the names of God that certainly ascribes to him this power. He has the power to change all these things, to make it different, to have kept my sons and my husband alive, but he didn't. And we can question that too and get bitter about why did God let something happen, or why didn't God stop something else from happening. But ultimately, you see an amazing story that ends in the book of Ruth with God's big cosmic plan of bringing his son into the world unfold one step further with the genealogy of David, the ancestor of Christ, being realized through this family. And so, I don't know, it's just amazing to look even just at this chapter and see how these two women go through so much and are still so focused on the Lord.
Yeah, you think about Naomi looking at the situation, it was bad. There's no question about that. But she didn't come back empty. Mm-hmm. She came back with somebody who was going to your point, when we can read the rest of the story, understand how significant she was. But that doesn't change the fact that she felt this at the time, to your point. And as we've talked about so often on this program, people can feel bitterness. They can feel down, depressed, desperate. And sometimes God is all around us and we still miss what he's doing. And it behooves us to take a step back every once in a while to see God's work even in the midst of great difficulties. And there's no question that difficulties arise. There's no question that things happen. But sometimes we need to look around and just remember who our Ruths are, the people in our lives that are doing so many good things for us. May not be in the situation that we are expecting it to be in, but he's still there. And that's what I love about Ruth. That's what I love about Naomi, that she showed this amazing love to this woman, and even in the midst of this horrible bitterness, understood as the book goes on that she is going to be blessed by God, and she is taken care of by God. And it's the same for us because we're from God.
Thanks for listening. Show your support by leaving a review on your podcast app, and share this episode with someone you want to encourage. If you have questions or would like to get in touch with us, go to youarefromgod.com. That's youarefromgod.com.